Hi, this is Father Jim Martin. I'm an associate editor of America Magazine and author of My Life with the Saints, talking to you about prayer. In the first episode, we talked about the examination of conscience, a way of looking back over your day and praying. And then last week, we talked about Ignatian contemplation, which was using your imagination to place you in a scripture scene. This week, I'd like to talk about another kind of prayer called Lectio divina. That's L-E-C-T-I-O, divina, and it really means sacred reading or spiritual reading. And there's two ways of doing Lectio divina, which is an old practice used by monks and still used by monks and nuns and priests and lay people today. One is a four-part way, and the other is a one-part way. So the four-part way is this: the four parts of traditional Lectio divina are asking four questions. Obviously, you would pick a text. So let's pick the text for this week, where Jesus talks about the tenant who hires day laborers. So you remember that story where the farmer goes out and hires some day laborers, and at the end of the day, he pays the people who he hired late in the day the same as what he paid the people he hired earlier. So if you might take that text, or any other text for that matter, the first question you ask yourself is, what does the text say? So you basically read a passage from Scripture. It could be long or short, and you just ask a simple question: what is going on here? What's going on in the text? What is Jesus saying? What are the disciples saying? Is there healing going on? In this parable that we talk about this Sunday, or we read this Sunday, Jesus is telling a little parable. So you'd be very careful about reading carefully what's going on. This is a place where a Bible commentary can be very helpful. There's all sorts of good Bible commentaries around that could help you understand what the text is saying. In first century Palestine, they had a lot of different traditions and customs that we might not be familiar with, and so a Bible commentary can really help you understand what the text says. The next step is, what does the text say to me? So you might be reading this passage about Jesus talking about the different day laborers, some of whom get paid what you might think is an unjust wage because they only work part of the day. Some of whom get paid what you might think is a fair wage because they work the whole day. And what does that say to you? Well, maybe it says to you that you feel sometimes in your life that you're not treated justly. So how does the text speak to you? What parts of your life are touched by that text? That's the second question. The third question is, what do you want to say to God about that text? So maybe if you're reading the parable this week, which is from Matthew 20, by the way, you might start to feel, well, gee, there are parts in my life that I feel are unjust. I'd like to tell God about that. I'd like to tell God how I feel about those certain parts in my life. So what do you want to say to God about this text? What is your response to God? Because you remember we talked about prayer being a conversation, and so if you're reading Scripture, it's important to talk to God in your prayer. You might imagine yourself seated before God or seated before Jesus, and really express what you're feeling about that passage. The fourth question is, what difference will this text make in my life? What action do I want to take? So maybe if there's a part of my life that I feel is unjust, maybe I could seek some sort of redress. Maybe if there's people who you feel are being treated unjustly, let's say immigrants or something who are not being paid fairly, maybe you would want to try to help them in some way. So the text really needs to make a claim on our life. You really have to actualize the text, as theologians say. You have to make it real. So the four questions in Lectio Divina are, what does the text say? What does the text say to me? What do I want to say to God about the text? And what difference will this text make in my life? That's the kind of fourth step process of Lectio Divina. But there's a simpler way of praying Lectio, and it's something along the lines of what St. Ignatius called savoring. Now this sometimes works best in something like a psalm. So let's take the psalm, "The Lord is my shepherd," the 21st psalm. You might get to a particular passage where it says, "He leads me beside restful waters." And you might find yourself drawn to just that phrase, restful waters. What might that mean in your life? Maybe it's a phrase that just makes you feel consoled or comforted by God. And so Ignatius would say, maybe what you need to do is just rest on that phrase and savor it. That's another way of doing Lectio Divina, letting the text really penetrate your heart and also really engaging the text and, in a sense, resting in those words. Sometimes Lectio Divina doesn't have to be as complicated as 4 questions. Sometimes it could be as simple as just resting with the text and enjoying the text and letting it, in a sense, soak into you and having you savor the text. Lectio Divina is a really important way of praying because it engages Scripture, and we believe as Christians and as Catholics that God speaks to us very strongly through Scripture. God is present in the Word, not simply when it's proclaimed at Mass, but also in the comfort and privacy of your own home, where you can do Lectio Divina anytime you want.